listening to the Betmaker Show. This is the College Football Week 3 betting odds preview for Thursday, September 12th, 2019. And now, live from Las Vegas, the host of the Betmaker Show, Brian Blessing.
As always, we love talking college football. Brian Blessing and Bruce Marshall from the legendary publication, The Gold Sheet. We're hanging in Las Vegas. We're going to dive into this weekend's card in the NCAA. Bruce, we're starting to get a sample size and get a little read on who these teams are and definitively form opinions. Maybe just a broad brush opener to you. Are there a handful of teams that maybe you had questions on before the season was to commence, and now you've got an idea what you're dealing with?
Yeah, a little bit. I think we're seeing some of these teams at the top of the polls. I mean, dispel some of the questions we had about them. Now the schedule is going to get a little bit tougher, but when we knew Alabama and Clemson were going to be good, we had a thought Jalen Hurts would be pretty good for Oklahoma. He's turned out to be really good thus far. The Justin Fields at Ohio State, that looks pretty darn good. So the Buckeyes don't look like they're missing Urban Meyer at all. So at the top of the polls, these teams are surprising us there. And as always, we're watching for some teams that might emerge. We'll get even a better idea after this week as we get a little bit closer to these teams entering conference play in a few weeks. One thing to note here, just the schedule, and I wrote about it in the Gold Sheet this week. I compared all the non-conference schedules of teams across the country and rated them by conference there. So that's something you might want to take a look at. It's up there at our website right now, but you can look at that and kind of get a feel who these teams have been playing, because the most 95% of these non-conference games are all in September here. So you get an idea who has been fattening up on some bad teams or who may have been getting beat, but having to go against some tough ones. So that's something to keep in mind as we move forward too.
Well, maybe right out of the gate, bud. I mean, like Alabama, Sasquatch Foot, Duke, New Mexico State. Okay. But now they're going on the road and laying 25.5 at South Carolina, who had, obviously a hard-fought game against North Carolina in the opener, and forget the Charleston Southern Buccaneer game. And I know there's an injury to deal with here for South Carolina, but that's a big number to be laying on the road.
It is, although I'll tell you, back in Hoover in the summer at SEC Media Days, the one game on the whole schedule that Nick Saban talked more about, and it wasn't just his normal filibuster. I mean, he was actually talking about this game, was this one. And I got the feeling that he still remembers the last time he came to Williams-Brice Stadium was in 2010, and he got beat 35-21. Now, he hasn't forgotten that, and I am confident. I mean, he was talking about that a lot in Hoover, that he'll make sure his players are primed. Big difference. Steve Spurrier was on the sideline 9 years ago for South Carolina. Now it's Will Muschamp. And as one of Saban's former aides, we've got to point out that Saban has never lost a game to one of his former assistants. Now, you're talking a 25.5 point line, like you said here. But I think they're with young Helinski, and there's a story I hope has a really nice ending for this young man. But this will not be a good chapter this week for him. In for Bentley at quarterback for the Gamecocks, and Bama's going to try to keep pace with Clemson. I think that'll be the rallying cry this week. I wouldn't be surprised if Bama boat races the Gamecocks here. 45-10 Alabama. If Nick wants this one, like I think he does, erase the memory of 2010. You're going to get a score like that on Saturday.
All right, one that was circled before the year, one that should be close. The number dictates that. That's Iowa laying 2.5 at Iowa State. Total on this game, let's call the consensus 44.5, Bruce.
Yeah, I think since they resumed this series in 1977, the Cyhawk series, and I'm old enough to remember when these teams didn't play every year, and I think it took an act of the state legislature to get them together, and I think Iowa was the one resisting. But since they started to play in 77, they played every year since. And this is probably the best matchup they've had in what will be the 43rd straight meeting between the Iowa schools. Now, Iowa, I'm keeping an eye on Kirk Ferentz again here. We saw him do this in 2015. If he can win this game, and he can win at Michigan in a couple of weeks, and we'll talk about that the first week in October when we get to it. I think this team is capable of making a run like the 2015 team did. The defense is there. Phil Parker, another typical Parker defense, tough up front. Epinesa, the defensive end, one of the best pass rushers in the country. And Nate Stanley at quarterback NFL scouts are interested. I think he's going to be playing on Sundays. He's a very underrated, the NFL's not underrating him, and he's posting some big numbers. He's big and tough, and he can throw, and he can move some too. He's an NFL quarterback. Kirk Ferentz has only dropped 4 of his last 21 against the number. And by the way, the last 4 years, Iowa has won in this series. And last year, talked about that defense. When Iowa State had some NFL-bound skill weapons on its offense last year, only scored 3 points in this game at Iowa City last year. That was before Purdy, the quarterback, took over the freshman a year ago in October last season. But nonetheless, I think Iowa State's in some trouble, and they darn near lost that opener to Northern Iowa, too. Maybe looking ahead to this, but I think Iowa's got their number here. 24-17 Hawkeyes, and keep an eye on Iowa. I think this is a team that can make some noise, one of those teams we talked about at the top of the segment here.
College football, those situational things, the look-ahead spots, the letdown spots, and then the odd revenge game that surfaces. And it's a weird one that maybe flies under the radar a little bit, because I know you and I last summer, we talked about, watch out, Michigan State going out to Arizona State. Herm Edwards, early in the season, the rah-rah thing could work, and Michigan State could be walking into a buzzsaw. And sure enough, Arizona State upset them. Michigan's laying 14 here. Totals 42. Rest assured, Michigan State did not forget that.
Yes, you're right. And Michigan State ended up having all sorts of trouble offensively last year. And we got an early glimpse of that in that game in Tempe. They just couldn't get moving. And I'll give Herm credit. One thing he has shown, his smarts from his years in the NFL, and even though he's in the studio at ESPN for almost a decade, he's a good game manager. And we've seen Arizona State benefit from that the last couple of years. Having said that, though, now they're going out on the road for the first time with the true freshman quarterback who hasn't looked all that bad, but he's a little spindly kid, Jaden Daniels. He's going to be facing a very physical Michigan State defensive front. One of the best defenses in the country last year. Now, it's one of the worst offenses Michigan State had, but nothing wrong with that defense. They've already got 9 sacks. And, oh, yes, that offense looked like it finally started to get together last week against Western Michigan, put up 51 with Lewerke, the quarterback, finally doing something. The revenge might mean something here. 31-16, we took Michigan State. So if it gets much beyond, they were maxing out at that around 2 touchdowns. But I don't think we're going to go with Arizona State here with the freshman quarterback making his first start on the road.
Bruce, I think this is intriguing for 2 teams. And I wanted to get your take on this because I think there's an opportunity, which is what this is all about, to maybe make a little money down the road based on something we saw last week. Penn State is 2-0. They beat Buffalo last week, 45-13. If you had not watched that game, you go, oh, okay, Penn State took care of business, as they should, and just move on. But if you watch that game, Buffalo dominated Penn State at the point of attack in the first half of that game, had a 10-7 lead going into the locker room, ran the ball down their throat. The freshman quarterback, actually, the run set up the pass. They were looking great. They come out of the locker room. The freshman quarterback does what freshman quarterbacks do. He threw a pick six, then a 3-and-out, a blocked punt. The punter breaks his leg, a grisly injury. Buffalo's in disarray. The poor kid is scraped away and taken off the field. Penn State tilts them, gets 21 points in the blink of an eye, 45-13. You go to that box score, Buffalo outgained Penn State on the road, dominated them physically. All right, so let's start on the Penn State side of the equation. They're now laying 17 at home to Pittsburgh. The total on the game is 53. Pitt's defense is better than Buffalo's defense, and Pitt can't score. I don't know that there are a lot of points in this game. The total's on the 53. I'm going to get to the Buffalo thing in a second, but I'm just saying the Penn State thing, if you didn't see that game or didn't dive into that box score, you're missing a lot.
You're right. By the way, that's why I think Buffalo might be the best play on the card this week at Liberty, but that's another game. But Penn State, you're right. I mean, that pick six doesn't happen. And then everything sort of snowballed after that. I mean, Buffalo's got a chance to win that game. They look better than Penn State in the first half. I mean, Penn State, like you mentioned, you look at the numbers at the end of the game and you wonder how that score got that way. They only gained about 3 yards per carry, 3.2. So they weren't running the ball. And there's still some questions about Penn State, where all this is going, how good Collier, the quarterback, is. That was a misleading score. Pitt got back. Don't overlook that win over Ohio U. That's a very good MAC team. And Frank Solich, good record as an underdog. Yeah, they're tough. And Pittsburgh took care of them last week. The defense played fine. And they were actually playing well into the second half of the opener against what might be a very good Virginia team, too. Pickett, the quarterback, I think is going to improve as the season goes along with his new offensive coordinator, Mark Whipple, who had most recently been the head coach at UMass, but he had been a quarterback whisperer throughout his career, including some time with Ben Roethlisberger earlier in his career. So Pickett's going to get better, and I think you can make a case for Narduzzi here in Pitt. 12-6 is a road dog. That's not too bad a mark in this role, and they're getting plenty of points here. And by the way, they were kind of embarrassed last year at Heinz Field by Penn State when McSorley was still there, and Penn State ran up a score on them. Pitt covered it up here a couple of years ago, and Barkley was still on the Nittany Lions roster. 35-21 Penn State, but we're going to take Pitt plus the points on Saturday.
Let's make some money tonight.
For outstanding information and special offerings and promotions, we invite you and encourage you to sign up for our newsletter today simply by going to the website at betmaker.com. All right, Bruce, now the Buffalo Liberty game that you just alluded to, Buffalo's laying 5.5, 6 on the road, totals 55. I will throw out the caution flag in that Buffalo obviously invested a lot into that Penn State game, and you're playing a big boy school, and Penn State's, incredible depth, I think, took its toll in the second half of that game. But Buffalo certainly did not disgrace themselves. My only fear would be maybe they got beat up in that game a little bit. Liberty can't score, but Liberty's got a good defense. We can dive into this game, but beyond that, I guess the thing I want to say is keep an eye on Penn State. But this is a Buffalo team, and I'm a big fan of the MAC, and we're going to be seeing these teams play weeknight football later in the year, and I think people should always pay attention to the MAC and the Sun Belt. But I would say this, Buffalo lost Tyree Jackson, their quarterback. They lost stud wide receivers. One got cut. He had a chance to make an NFL team, didn't make it in Tampa Bay. So they lost a lot on offense. But what came back was that offensive line, and they've got terrific running backs. I think this is a Buffalo team that everybody thought, they lost everything. I think they're going to contend again in the MAC.
Well, they kept the most important piece of the whole puzzle, Lance Leopold. This guy is a hidden treasure, and we know his record at Wisconsin Whitewater. It was like Gino Auriemma's at UConn. He's 103-6. And I'm not surprised at all. This guy is one of the best kept secrets in the country. How about this? Last year, they had guys like Tyree Jackson, like you said, but he was 4-0 as visiting chalk last year. Visiting chalk. They didn't get there in the MAC title game, but that was a neutral site. Against FBS foes since late 2016, Leopold 17-7-2 against the number. This guy gets the team prepared. They don't have flat spots for him. And that's why I think they've got a shot here. And, by the way, listen, Liberty's been getting beaten up itself. I mean, I know it wasn't Penn State, but Louisiana Lafayette roughed them up last week. They're giving up 300 yards per game on the ground. Hugh Freeze, the coach, listen, he has been coaching from a hospital bed and or a medical chair. It's been very disruptive. He had a staph infection, life-threatening. He had to leave the team for a while in summer and prep, and he's been kind of coaching from the press box. It's been very distracting, and they're not protecting their quarterback, Buckshot Calvert. Great name there, but he's been sacked 10 times already. I mean, nothing's happening for Liberty here right now. Absolutely nothing. And I think Buffalo goes in there and steadier situation and not the distractions that Liberty's had. 35-21. Bulls under a touchdown. That's a steal, I think, in Lynchburg on Saturday.
What else sticks out to you this week, Bruce? I mean, any games in particular? Let me just throw it your way.
Let's look at this BYU-USC game. And there's been some off-field stuff at USC this week. Like we thought, they're taking that thing apart piece by piece, kind of like Nebraska a couple of years ago. The new school president in there, Lynn Swan, was forced out as AD. We saw that coming. That's what happened in Nebraska a couple of years ago. The coach is going to come next. They want to put the AD in place before they hire a new coach. However, Clay Helton can mess up all these plans if he pulls a big season out of his hat, and maybe he can with this new Texas Tech offense. He lost Kingsbury as his coordinator. We got the next best thing, Graham Harrell, who's carbon copy of Kingsbury and what he's doing, and pulled him out of North Texas. And SC's offense has got playmakers at running back and receiver that can make plays in space. The freshman quarterback looked really good last week against Stanford. Stanford, though, did not pressure him at all. And you or I could have been completing passes last week without much pressure. Kalani Sitake, BYU's head coach, is a pretty shrewd guy, especially on defense. He will come after Slovis this week, and let's see how he does against some pressure. That BYU finish last week was one of the best finishes I've seen in years. You talk about drama and pulling a game out of the fire. Clutch. Zach Wilson hung in there. That big completion right at the end. The field goal to tie the game in Tennessee was good by about 8 inches. And then they pulled that thing out in overtime. A complete gut check win for BYU that Sitake needed badly. And let's not forget, SC has played 2 quarterbacks making their first ever college starts in Reyna, Fresno, and Mills, Stanford last week. Wilson is an experienced quarterback, and he's good. And I think BYU gets him here, which is a big game for Sitake. First road game for SC. 27-24 BYU, though part of me kind of wants to see Helton keep winning and make SC sweat because that's what they're trying to do here is move him out. But this is sort of like Major League, the movie, Brian. They're going to keep winning. Maybe they have to keep him. We'll see.
Let me give you 2 for the road. Hawaii at Washington. And Washington's a 21.5-point favorite. Total's 59. Washington loses the weird weather-delayed game to Cal. Hawaii's offense, singing like a top, over on the island. But now that first trip to the mainland, and they're coming against a team that probably has a stone in their shoe. Is Washington flawed, or was that just a weird game where you get off the field, you got to come back, and all of a sudden you find yourself in a game, and they end up losing? Is this a mad team that takes Hawaii to the woodshed, or are there problems with Washington?
Well, could be. I mean, I don't think Cal's that bad. Defense is granite for Cal. Cal beat Washington last year, too, so maybe there's something in that matchup. Hawaii, by the way, Hawaii can somehow win this game. Hawaii can make a legitimate claim that it should be in the Rose Bowl. It would be 3-0 in the Pac-12. They've already beaten 2 Pac-12 teams. Those, like you said, were both in Aloha Stadium. I don't know that Washington is good enough that it can just go out there and name the score. Hawaii can score, and Nick Rolovich is shrewd. They've played Pac-12 teams. They've been beating them. Maybe not quite as good as Washington, but I'm not sure how good Washington really is, to tell you the truth. And maybe Hawaii, it's a lot of points with an offense that can move, and the back door is going to be wide open. So I'm not sure I'd want to lay it with Washington here.
Okay, and we'll wrap it up with our own backyard here. UNLV's at Northwestern. Northwestern's 18.5, totals 53. Fitzgerald, against the spread as a big favorite is not good. But here we go again, which, I've always marveled at how UNLV can't recruit, put football players on the right side of a plane, looking out a window, flying into Vegas. I know the facilities weren't great. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, come on. At the end of the day, this program's been a train wreck for far too many years. We're both fans of Tony Sanchez. He's a great guy, but they got rolled by Arkansas State. I mean, just flat out mauled. 2 years ago, it was Howard walking in here beating them. Sanchez has the job because he has the booster money and they got all the new facilities and everything. Now, the athletic director, Desiree Francois, she's up for the USC job. This thing it's a gong show, Bruce. And if UNLV go, and their schedule's a gauntlet now, I don't think they win more than 3 games. I'm just very curious and the quarterback situation's bad. I don't know that they do get rolled here, but if they go and absolutely get pitchforked by Northwestern, does Tony Sanchez survive the season?
I don't know, Brian. Good questions all. I mean, he probably wants Desiree to get that job at USC, and this is a stepping stone for her at UNLV. We've known that. She's got her eye on UCLA too. If Dan Guerrero ever retires, we keep hearing that he might retire at some point soon. So we'll see. But no, Tony's in trouble. I think he knows it too. However, you mentioned the Howard game 2 years ago. The week after that, they played one of their best games of that season. They went up to Idaho, and Idaho wasn't that bad, and they boat raced the Vandals up there in Moscow. And they're not going to do that to Northwestern. But here's a note. Sanchez has been pretty good as a road dog. In fact, against Power 5 teams on the road the last 4 years, and that's Michigan, UCLA, Ohio State, and USC. They've covered the number pretty handily in most of those games. So this has not been a bad spot for Sanchez. UNLV seems to show up for these games, and they catch the other teams. Not a big effort. Northwestern's had the week off after Stanford, but a train wreck that first game, the offense. And you're right, Fitzgerald has not been he's very formful. He's a great underdog coach. He's not been good laying points at Evanston. He didn't cover all 4 laying points at home last year. He's only covered 2 of his last 8 hosting non-Big Ten teams at Evanston. So there's a technical case to be made here for the UNLV, and we'll make it one more time for Tony. He might be missing, Barney Cotton, his offensive coordinator, is awaiting a heart transplant. So he's out, and they may be missing Cotton. But just historically, from technical factors, makes us think that Northwestern is not going to cover this game. Maybe UNLV, this is a spot. 28-19, Wildcats, they win, but you're asking them to cover 3 touchdowns with an offense that's kind of sluggish. That's going to be tough for Northwestern to do.
And I promise, finally, but it's on this game, because I think it's something you would pay attention to. The nature of the industry now with in-game wagering. Keep tabs on this game. If UNLV starts slowly, I've got to believe the quarterback Armani Rogers is on an incredibly short leash. And then Kenyon Oblad, who's is he a sophomore, Bruce, I guess? I mean, he played at Liberty High School here in Vegas. He's got to go to the backup. And if the backup, and he can pass the ball better than Armani Rogers, who's kind of a dual threat guy. I'm just saying, from an in-game perspective, keep tabs on this, because I think it's really possible that maybe even before halftime, UNLV makes a quarterback change in this game. So it bears very close watching if you're an in-game wagering person.
Yeah, I think Oblad's warming up in the bullpen at the start of the game here, Brian, the way Armani's been throwing lately. But I expect UNLV to slow the game down. And by the way, I think Northwestern's just going to try to play some smash mouth here, because they were not happy with their quarterback. And Trent Green's son, who came in and looked better than the Clemson transfer, broke his foot and is out for the year. And now it's back to Johnson, who looked miserable against Stanford, 4.2 quarterback rating. So they got some quarterback issues at Northwestern, too.
Hey, yes, no, just real quick. You brought it up. I promise. This is it. We love doing it. We could go all day long. How about Stanford against Central Florida? How big a game is that? Central Florida, this is a team that's been really good for a long time, but they can never get a Power 5 school to come to their barn. And they got Stanford coming in here. How big has UCF circled this game?
Yeah, well, they have circled it, and it's a tough trip for Stanford down there. It'll be hot and humid, and I think they're in some trouble. Now they're going to get Costello back at quarterback. He's been cleared. They're down 2 of their 2 starting tackles, and one of them was an All-American, preseason All-American. So they've got problems on the offensive line. I don't think they have skill position people like they've had. They don't have a receiver like Arcega-Whiteside, who could just catch jump balls last year. He's with the Eagles now. Bryce Love has graduated. The running backs look kind of pedestrian. And the defense, there aren't playmakers there. They got 3 quarterbacks they could probably use here if Mack is available this week for UCF, and they're all pretty good. UCF 42-24.
Oh, there you go. I was just going to say that total's run. You got Central Florida laying 8, but the total was 55.5 up to 62.5, and you said your score was what?
42-24. UCF, so we'll go over.
All right. Outstanding. Bruce Marshall, The Gold Sheet. It's a legendary publication. Bruce Marshall's a legend. We're thrilled he joins us. I'm Brian Blessing in Las Vegas, wishing everybody the very best of luck this week in college football.
Betmaker, let's make some money tonight.
Well, that's the Betmaker Show for now. We publish multiple times each week. We'd like to thank you for listening, and if you liked what you heard, please take a moment to leave a rating and review, or subscribe to our show feed, or share our show with a friend or two and help us grow the show. We very much appreciate it. Visit us on the web at betmaker.com. And reminder to sign up for the newsletter. Thanks to our engineer, Darren Vandermolen, and producer, Mike Gallivan. The Betmaker Show is a production of Cardinal Marketing Incorporated. Betmaker is a registered trademark. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of this content without the express written consent of Cardinal Marketing Incorporated is strictly prohibited.
The handicapping and sports odds information contained on this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Please confirm the wagering regulations in your jurisdiction, as they vary from state to state, province to province, and country to country. Using this information to contravene any law or statute is prohibited. The podcast is not associated with, nor is it endorsed by any professional or collegiate league, association, or team. This podcast does not target and is not intended for an audience under the age of 18. If you think that you have a gambling addiction, stop this podcast now and please seek help.
Gambling and betting on sports is a form of entertainment and should be about having a good time. But when done excessively, it may negatively affect other areas of a person's life, such as their physical and mental health, school or work performance, finances, and or interpersonal relationships. At Betmaker.com and the Betmaker Show, we're concerned about the addiction that gambling may cause, and for this reason, we encourage everyone to practice responsible gambling, an approach to gambling that helps you ensure that it remains an enjoyable activity. Here are the main principles of responsible gambling. Don't think of gambling as a way to make money. Always gamble with money that you can afford to lose. Set limits and stick to them. Never chase losses. Don't gamble when you're depressed or upset, and create a healthy balance. Always be aware of how much time you spend gambling or thinking about gambling. And do not allow gambling to cause you to miss out on time with family and friends or time spent on other activities you enjoy. By following these guidelines, gambling can be a good time and great entertainment. If you feel at any time that your gambling is taking away from important areas of your life, is causing you stress or depression, or is leading to financial losses that are beyond your control, please reach out for help. Learn more at responsiblegambling.org.